Boa tarde a todos os clientes do Itaú. A gente vai fazer essa live em inglês, então eu vou passar agora para inglês. Thank you very much, all of our Itaú clients. My name is Eduardo Camara. I am the CIO of Itaú Asset Management, and today we have a super special guest, Mr. Garry Kasparov. Maybe he doesn't need introduction, but I'll try anyway. He was born in Baku, Azerbaijan, in the Soviet Union in 1963, and came to international fame at the age of 22 as the youngest world chess champion in history. This was in 1985. He held this title up to the year 2000 and was ranked #1 chess player in the world for 255 months in a row. A record is still unbeaten. Mr. Kasparov achieved a rating of 2851 in 1999, a rating never seen before, and a record held up to 2013, long after his retirement as chess player. As chess fans will know, he had great historical battles with Karpov in 1984, 1985, and at least 2 historical battles against IBM artificial intelligence team, culminating with the Deep Blue beating Kasparov in 1997 in what became the first computer beating a world chess champion. The story is narrated in a great book, a must-read book, written by Kasparov, Deep Thinking. I really recommend this book. After retiring from chess in 2005, he devoted his time to writing and politics. He's now a global human rights activist. He's a strong critic to Russian President Vladimir Putin, of course. In 2015, he published a book called Winter is Coming, Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped. Another must-read book to understand why we are where we are today. Mr. Kasparov is currently the chairman of Human Rights Foundation, and he lives in New York. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here, Garry. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Our pleasure. We have here as well another chess grandmaster. I don't think this is very often to have 2 grandmasters in the same room, but Giovanni Vescovi. He is a chess grandmaster since 1998, 7-time national champion with highest world rank of 39 in 2010. Giovanni works with us at Itaú Asset Management as part of our MultiAsset Class investment team. He's responsible primarily for international equities. He's friends of Mr. Kasparov, and he once told me that his life achievement was winning a game against Kasparov in a friendly match, after which he felt he had the right to retire. Garry might not even remember that game, I guess. Well, Garry, we are very sad about what is happening in Ukraine today. We from Itaú and our clients for sure. The idea is to have a conversation here. We are going to split the conversation in 2 parts. The first part to understand where we are and how we got here. And the second part, try to think about the future. Giovanni, you want to kickstart?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's also a pleasure for me to be here as well. And you mentioned probably Garry doesn't remember those training games, those friendly matches, but for me, it was really a great honor to be playing a few games with him, an idol from my childhood. And well, it was time for me to retire. I was very happy. So anyway, we are here today and we'll be talking about much more important issues for mankind. And well, Garry, kicking off here, I want to start with some question on your background, because I see we have followed your achievements as a chess genius that you are, and I'm sure many of our clients also have been following your fight for freedom, democracy, and human rights more recently. But part of our audience may not know is that you have been upholding these values since a long time, at least since the late 1980s. So my question is, what moved you to be so vocal against communism and Communist Party, even though you have been in a privileged position as the world champion and a star athlete of the Soviet propaganda?
I was mentioned. I was born and raised in the Soviet Union, in Baku. It's the capital of the now independent state, Azerbaijan. And yeah, you're right. I was in a privileged position, but I also had my skills and ability to analyze things. And I saw very quickly the gap between reality and propaganda. And my first trip to the foreign country was when I was 13. So I played in France at the under 16 World Championship. And when I came back, I just couldn't help by just, bringing one-on-one together. Also, I had support from family members, from my uncle, my younger brother of my father, because my father died when I was 7. And I also read some books that were not available in libraries. So by the time I finished school, I already had pretty good ideas. So what was right and wrong in ideological sense. But still, it was very much like at the back of my mind, because I wanted to become the world champion. It was all about winning the title rather than concentrating on any political issues. But the matches with Karpov that was also mentioned, Eduardo mentioned, they were also rich with a political component, because Anatoly Karpov was a favorite of the system, darling of the system, a Russian world champion, and while I was half Armenian, half Jewish boy from Baku, so that's definitely was not to my advantage. And before I had a chance of beating Karpov at the chessboard, I had to go through tons of problems and obstacles surrounding my rise to the chess Olympus. So by winning the title at age 22, I was already a seasoned fighter for what I believe was the justice in chess, but also I could see beyond chess. And in the beginning of the perestroika and the Gorbachev in the Soviet Union and the formation of the nascent democratic movement, I felt that it was my duty as somebody with such fame and reputation and credibility to join it. So at early days, 24, 25, I was already engaged in promoting these values in the Soviet Union, and I was actively, just pursuing it until the collapse of the Soviet Union. And then in 1991, I thought that was it, so I could concentrate on chess now, and unfortunately, I was wrong. And seeing Vladimir Putin taking over from Yeltsin and hearing what he has been saying, and as someone, with Soviet education and enough experience in dealing with KGB, I had no doubts what this man was capable of if given the chance. So I already was thinking, just of returning back to the fighting field, defending democracy. So it took longer. So just I still play chess, but I have been already preparing myself mentally for the challenge. And in 2005, when I retired from professional chess, I knew that my place was just among those who desperately tried to prevent Russia from sliding back into the dark ages. So that's a very, very skeletal form, is a story of my beliefs in democracy and human rights. And since 2005, that was my life. And it was not just about Russia. It was a much bigger fight, because I believe that I had to share my expertise in Russia with others who never had the same experience and understanding of the dangers coming from Vladimir Putin. And the book that Eduardo mentioned was published in 2015. And I have to say that the publisher was very reluctant to have the subtitle, "Why Vladimir Putin and the enemies of a free world must be stopped." They said, "Oh, it's a Cold War. It's too, it's a stretch. The public may not understand it." And I said, "Look, it's a Cold War because winter is coming." And I have to say that some of the mainstream publications like New York Times or Washington Post, they had very critical reception of the book. So basically saying it's unpersuasive. It's a stretch. It's moved. Kasparov is a warmonger. And by the way, that was after Crimea already, annexation of Crimea. So what's interesting is that the same people who have been so critical of me 7 years ago, now they're still, on television, presenting themselves as experts in Russia. And of course, they dramatically changed their evaluation of Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, very, very interesting indeed. Yeah, I mean, I read the book. Winter is Coming is a great book, and then you argued that Putin election was a consequence of the fail of Russia adopting democracy and capitalism, and I mean, after the fall of the Soviet Union, right? So there was a need for a strong man from the public eyes, and this strong man was Putin in 2000 after Yeltsin, right? I mean, in 1919, Keynes published one of his great books, The Economic Consequences of the Peace, right? In which he argues that the strong war reparations imposed on Germany after the First World War would have serious economic and political consequences, not only to Europe, but to the whole world, right? So do you see similarities in those two cases? I mean, what happened after the First World War and what happened after the fall of the Soviet Union and where we are today?
No, it's, I'm afraid this kind of philosophical discussion, goes way beyond the boundaries of our conversation today, because it's not for 1 hour, it's for many, many hours, many days, and many books, thousands of pages to be written to actually make these comparisons. I can briefly say that's my opinion about the World War I. I think that this war actually influenced the entire 20th century. Because when you look at what happened, after World War I and the Bolshevik Revolution and the rise of Nazis in Germany and World War II and the Cold War, these things had such a deep roots in the tragedy of 1914 that that shifted us from the road into the what we all thought was a bright future into darkness. Now, the question is whether 1991, was an end of this nearly century-long history that had two world wars and many smaller wars. When I say smaller wars, though, I think it's Chinese civil war probably killed even more people. We just didn't know the exact numbers. And of course, the conflicts, between India and Pakistan. So the Asian context that we're not so much aware of. So yeah, they also, had millions and millions of people being killed. So the 20th century, despite technological progress, proved that human nature is not improving as fast as technology. Now, 1991 was a chance, but unfortunately, we missed this chance. And one of the reasons, complacency. Because the free world believed that, and I have to say, I admit my guilt. I also believe that we reached a point, of no return. The communism was defeated, and I read, as many of you, this best-selling book of Francis Fukuyama, The End of History. And I said, yeah, absolutely, it's end of history. Liberal democracy won. What else you need? What kind of confirmation you need to see the superiority of liberal democracy and market economy? And then for a few more years, we saw the world incessantly marching in this direction. But then it's all changed. And one of the reasons is we didn't come up with a new plan, a new strategy, because the Cold War, just ended a chapter of a history book for mankind. But when you start a new chapter, you have to come up with a new concept, new idea. So the free world was too lazy. Obviously, it was easy money to be made. So America, instead of leading the way and showing this is the right direction into the future, got busy with domestic affairs. Yeah, America still played a role globally, but definitely without a plan. Since the end of the World War II, from Harry Truman to Ronald Reagan and Bush 41, America had consistent foreign policy. That's everybody knew that America was there. Now, after the Cold War, at the end of the Cold War, it became, very much, just dependent on the president. So you had Clinton and then Bush, just, one side, another side. And then, of course, Obama, Trump, and Biden, just made this pendulum swinging even further and further. So with America basically abandoning its ideological leadership role, it created a vacuum. And this vacuum was filled. You had enough powers, and most of them are not benign powers, looking for advantages. So, and you had the rise of Chinese communism, getting more and more aggressive. You had Islamic radical terrorism, and of course, you had Russian revanchism. So I don't think that is the shift from from a very feeble democracy of the 90s into Putin's dictatorship was automatic. But it was a very slow process, like a slow motion. Putin didn't have tanks on the street. If you look at Putin, he kept, moving step by step as every dictator in the past. Just, slowly chipping away our freedoms, but also looking around and measuring the response of the free world. Vladimir Putin in 2001 was very different from Putin in 2005. And 2007 was different from 2012. So every time, he did something, he looked around, he could sniff the air, so just smell whether there was any danger, and he just discovered that there was no resistance. So it's as much as we have to blame ourselves in Russia for being, naive about Putin's intentions, though I wouldn't call myself naive. My first article about Vladimir Putin's true intentions and dangers was published in January 4, 2001 in the Wall Street Journal. So I'm not, simply saying, oh, I knew it. It was on the record. So for more than 20 years, I've been warning about what he was capable of if given the chance. Why? Because I heard him saying the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. He said it, not me. So that's already a warning signal. Once KGB, always KGB. There were no former KGB officers. Vladimir Putin. His first act as a Russian president was to restore Soviet anthem. When you start adding things together, you could see that the guy already had a vision of the world in his mind. Again, he had no resources and no arrogance and no right political climate to push forward. But we had to actually stop him at very early days. But all my warnings that, Putin had a Hitler potential, they were dismissed. And very often I've been probably just treated with contempt. How could I compare Putin to Hitler and to a dictator Stalin? Okay, now we are where we are. And the reason is the free world didn't want to hear, not me, Vladimir Putin himself. It couldn't be more clear for Putin to state his goals 15 years ago in Munich at the Security Conference in Europe, February 2007. He talked about return to the spheres of influence. This is for those who are not aware of the gravity of this sentence. That's exactly the language from Molotov-Ribbentrop Agreement, Stalin-Hitler's pact to divide Europe. Spheres of influence. It had a very clear meaning that Putin wanted to come back with the Russian imperial power, and he said that NATO had to go back to the 1997 line. So, did we hear the warnings? No. The West ignored it. And next year, Putin attacked the Republic of Georgia. So, and the free world was very busy trying to spread the blame, calling the Georgian president, then President Mikhail Saakashvili, partially responsible. And then we had, of course, annexation of Crimea. And I thought that was enough. Annexation of Crimea was a clear signal that Vladimir Putin was not paying any respect to international treaties signed by Russia, and he was about to start reshaping the international borders. And even after Crimea, the sanctions on Russia were it's a lip service. And of course, and we can go. It's a long list of Vladimir Putin's crimes, but every time he looked around and he saw no consequences, so he pushed forward. So that's why the attack on the 24th of February was not a surprise to people who were listening to Putin, people who were following his career, and people who knew that lying was one of the key traits of his character.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Putin himself said what he was going to do, and, nobody was paying attention. I mean, it seems that nobody was paying really attention to his words. It's like, it's clear that he's building a small advantages, as we say in chess. He's trying to strengthen his position, and nobody was paying attention. And but now it seemed also that when you mention about the sphere of influence, one could think that perhaps he would stop in Ukraine and trying to restore a little bit what was the geography of the Soviet Union. What is your opinion in this regard? I mean, do you think, because you know him well, do you think he's going for more? What's your reading, Garry?
Look, I read few history books, and I know that dictators never stop until they stopped. So that's the very discussion. And it's, again, thank you very much for bringing it in, because that's a discussion. Oh, can we do something, to stop him? By the way, on what basis you are sacrificing the territory of independent country? The country that is paying in blood now of their citizens for our unwillingness to hear these warnings. Yes, Putin was very blunt about Ukraine. He never recognized Ukraine as an independent sovereign state. He always looked at Ukraine as the obstacle on the way of his dominance in the former Soviet space and also Eastern Europe. So for him, Ukraine was something similar as Poland to Stalin. And Putin, just again, he followed his words and did everything he could to peacefully subdue Ukraine without minimum bloodshed. But though even in 2014 war, nearly 15,000 people have been killed. But it's not, of course, it's paled by comparison to what's happening now. And Ukrainians resisted it. So they were under pressure from Germany, from France. America didn't care. And Putin tried to make Ukraine subordinate. And their refusal to follow, left him with no choice but to attack, because he believed he could do that. He could take Kyiv in 3 days to put his puppet government and basically turn Ukraine into his colony. Now, question is, well, he stopped there. Why? The dictators never ask why, it's always why not. So he is now using nuclear blackmail in Ukraine. So what would stop him to use the same nuclear blackmail for Lithuania or for Poland? So it's now it's a crucial moment in our history, because Ukraine is a big country. It's not the Republic of Georgia, it's not Lithuania. It's a country that it's size-wise, it's the biggest in Europe. Population is nearly 45 million people, though now nearly 10 million of them displaced. It has big army, and it shows that it can fight back. So Ukraine is our best chance to defeat Putin's military machine. And that's why we should not miss this chance. And at the end of the day, this is not just about Putin and Ukraine. This is about the world order. So we have now, this is our audience, business people. You understand that the advantage of the free world is following the orders. So we have a rule of law. We know how things work. Yeah, we have our problems, but at least we know the rules of the game. Now, if all bets are off, how are you going to do business? How are you going to make long-term plans? It's if the stronger country can actually annex territory of the next country. How many annexations happened after World War II in the world? Annexations. Yeah, there was China, Tibet, but it's for world economies was insignificant, but still that was. And Saddam Hussein, Kuwait. That's it. Even in 2008, when Putin took part of Georgian territory, he was not bold enough to annex it. So there were no more annexations. And the world responded to Saddam Hussein with full power, because that could lead to forced reorganization of geopolitical map. So Putin annexed Crimea, and now he thought, why not? If I could get away with that, I'd like to have everything else from Ukraine. And unless he's paying the price, the full price for what he did and has been doing as we speak. So then, how are you going to stop China of taking Taiwan? China is watching. China is watching very, very carefully. So not just Putin's war there, but also the effect of the sanctions on Russia. Are the sanctions crippling or not? Can they survive these sanctions? So it's more than Ukraine. Ukraine is the front line of freedom now, but you have China, you have also Iran scratching their head, seeing around. So you have all unfree countries, the dictatorships, the thugs and terrorists. They're trying to understand how far they can go by opposing the free world. Is there a political will? Because at the end of the day, the free world has military power, has economic power. But is there political will? Is there just appetite to economic sacrifices? So far, I think as the response of Europe was really good. I mean, I didn't expect Europeans to show solidarity and also to accept economic pain to punish Putin, which is interesting because what's happening in Europe is a push from people. The European leaders, they were very timid in their response. But the pressure from the public forced them to change. There's also pressure in America, but Biden administration actually, believe it or not, is actually lagging behind. So it's I can recommend that, for those who are interested to look at the sanctions and the supply for Ukraine. So my organization did a special website called fightforukraine.org. Fight for Ukraine, it's 4 number. And this is full analysis of all measures taken by countries like Germany, America, EU, and Australia, and Great Britain. And you will see that America is almost at the bottom. So and again, that sends the wrong signal. And it's very important for us to make sure that this war is a chance to actually punish Putin once and for all. And I think that's what we have to look for as the desirable result. It's decisive military defeat of Putin's war machine in Ukraine.
Yeah, interesting. But just coming a step back, last week there was an article from Financial Times by Gillian Tett, title "Why I Should Have Listened to Garry Kasparov About Putin." I mean, I of course, well, actually you tweeted about it.
Yes.
Well, he describes about a dinner a few years ago where you have argued with some other guests that the one had the opportunity to stop Hitler in 1935, 36, 37, but it didn't. And the West was failing to stop Putin. And now basically we have the war in Ukraine happening. So why do you think world leaders didn't want to hear you? I mean, is this like the energy or fail to read history?
No, I don't think that there is a simple answer to this question. Is going back to what I said about at the end of the Cold War, it's complacency. And also though we read history books, but we believe that's not a lesson for us. Yeah, happened with somebody. I remember when I was a kid and in the Soviet Union, I studied history and I read stories about 1930s. You mentioned that. The appeasement policy and the failure of Britain and France to stop Hitler at early days. And I said, wow, how come? Were they so stupid? They didn't see that? Okay, now I learned that it's learned hard way that they were not stupid. They just, they tried to play safe. And in defense of Chamberlain and Daladier and other leaders of the free world then in 1937, 38. So I can tell that they were not doing business with Hitler. They tried to preserve peace, the way they saw fit, but they didn't know what's coming next. Now, I think the biggest mistake that was made is that people who did business with Russia, they had no doubt Russia was corrupt. It's a mafia state. And I always say that every country has its own mafia. In Russia, mafia has its own state. And Vladimir Putin is more likely like a capo de tutti capi, so the boss of bosses. So, but I think it's while recognizing that, people, just who did business with Russia, say, okay, fine, he's corrupt, big deal. He's just, the Russian elite, they steal money in Russia, they put them outside of Russia, they send their kids to Britain, to America, to France, to God knows where, in the free world. They keep their money there, they bought yachts, they bought palaces, that's just private jets. These people are no danger to us. And that was the biggest mistake. Because corruption for Putin was not the end means, but it was a cover-up of his geopolitical agenda. And again, he has been saying about it. It's not that he was hiding it, just it's somewhere. He has been talking about it. And every time, he could actually succeed with his corruption, like buying top politicians like Gerhard Schröder, or former German chancellor, or François Fillon, the former prime minister of France, or former chancellor of Austria, former prime minister of Finland. I'm talking about only top politicians. Then you had many former foreign ministers and other ministers, and of course captains of business and pop stars and movie stars. So he, again, we should give him credit. He built the most sophisticated network of agents and lobbyists ever seen in the history of humanity. And look, he was not shy of spending money. He was also in control of more money than any of us can imagine. So when you look at all the funds, between Russian hard currency reserves before it was frozen, Russian budget, and also the oligarchs' fortunes, he was in control of the amount exceeding $1 trillion. $1 trillion, directly or indirectly. And he used them. He used this money to buy more favors, to spread his influence. So also, if, again, I'm talking to business community, if budget is an indication of your intentions, all we have to do is to look at Putin's budget over the last 10 years. Steady cuts of social security, housing, healthcare, education, culture, and beefing up, boosting expenses on military, police, security apparatus, propaganda. If this is not a budget of war, what is that? And Putin thought that, he could actually realize his dream, which was, again, as he said, to take revenge for the loss of the Soviet Union in the Cold War. He knew the Russian army was not strong enough to beat NATO. I mean, he's not stupid. He could be crazy, but he's not stupid. But he doesn't have to fight NATO in the battlefield if he used nuclear blackmail. Because at the end of the day, it's about political will. And all he saw every time he bluffed, that, he had, we're talking about chess now, but I always said Putin is a more poker player. And in poker, you can win if you raise the stakes, having a weak cards, weak hand. And Putin had weak hand, but he kept, raising stakes, bluffed. And what's happened on the other side? Folding cards, folding cards, folding cards. Like Obama in 2013 in Syria. That was a turning point. I remember I have been arguing fiercely with one of the top liberal talk show presenters in America, who said, it's Syria. I said, no, it's not Syria. It will have consequences beyond Middle East, because that's for Putin is a message. It was before Crimea. Next year, Crimea. Next year, Syria. Putin saw a vacuum and he came in. So he came in and they carpet bombed Aleppo. What's happened there? Nothing happened. By the way, it's everything is connected now, because by helping Assad to stay in power and carpet bombing Syrian cities and pushing millions of Syrians outside, he created a wave of refugees. What's happened with this wave? Many of them landed in Europe. The outcome, the rise of the far-right groups in Europe. And all of them, surprise, surprise, are big Putin supporters. So Putin had this hybrid war very skillfully. So by manipulating by different factors that, it was not of his making. He's not an ideologue, but he's a very good opportunist. And then, he decided that it's time for him to attack even America and just to interfere with American politics. And again, it worked. So that's why his attack on Ukraine was based on his very little respect or even contempt for Western politicians. So anything he saw from Biden was weakness, nothing else. Collapse in Afghanistan. Wow, these people are not serious. So if not for Ukrainians' heroism and Putin winning the war in 3 days, we'll be seeing now Americans and Europeans negotiating with Putin's puppet government and saying, let's save what we can save now. So thanks God again, as every dictator, Putin bumped into the resistance of people, and the people now are saving, Ukrainian people are saving us from the worst of Putin's dictatorship.
Garry, you touched some very interesting topics. Of course, the nuclear risk is or nuclear bluff from Putin. We'll certainly come to that. But before that, you touched on on money issues, right? Putin's treasury and war chest, let's say like that. And you've been a fierce advocate, not from now, for many years, that you should, hit them where it hurts, where in his pockets, right? Do you think that today is this a financial war that West finally moved on and followed some of your early advice? Do you think today this is enough, or do you think that probably stakes are too high and we will have to see some military action in any case? Let's say, I don't know, NATO taking part in Ukraine, or another party besides Ukraine in the battlefield.
Look, we all know that even if you make right moves, you have to make them on time and in the right order. Sanctions today are very important, but these sanctions, even the smaller amount of the sanctions 8 years ago, could have prevented this war. I've been saying that sanctions could stop tanks from rolling, but they will not stop tanks when the tanks are rolling already and bombs being dropped. So imposing sanctions after 2014, serious sanctions, not this masquerade, because no matter what the West said about sanctions, Germany doubled the amounts of Russian gas buying after 2014. So Putin looked at the real numbers. And when you look at the Forbes list, you could see the dramatic increase of number of Russian billionaires in the Forbes list. So that tells you everything about the sanctions that were imposed in 2014 after Crimea. Even sanctions 6 months ago, when Biden met Putin first time, not Biden's words, oh, we had such a strong sanctions, we will put them in. No. Putin doesn't care. Words are cheap. So Americans failed to impose some sort of preventive sanctions. So now we are at a very different situation, as you correctly stated. So sanctions alone not enough, but they are absolutely fundamentally, they are crucial if we want Ukraine to win the war and we want to end Putin's regime. Because at the end of the day, he needs money. He needs money to pay for his war machine. He needs money to pay for his police. He needs money to pay for propaganda. There's no fanaticism there. So people are not going to die for him as he died for Hitler or Stalin. It's not ideological. It's mafia state. It's all about benefits. So if he runs out of money, there will be serious problems for him how to stay in power. But it's with the sanctions now, we have to make sure that the sanctions are not just. It's not about width of the sanctions, but it's also about depth. Depth means duration. So we have sanctions. These sanctions could topple Putin and destroy Russian economy, quickly, if they stay. But right now, there's a great ambiguity for how long these sanctions, could stay. We hear Americans sending very controversial signals. Sanctions are not permanent. They could be lifted. When? How they could be lifted? If Putin stops shooting, if Putin removes troops or retreats to the border of demarcation line of February 24th, or he should leave, Donbass, or he should give back Crimea. We don't know. And if we don't know, that's bad news. We have to know exactly what these sanctions are standing for. Also, again, we're talking, it's financial community. So have you not been surprised how Russia could avoid default by paying 170 million on coupons on its debt if, according to the Western sanctions, everything was blocked? Not everything was blocked. All of a sudden, you discover that not all banks have been cut from SWIFT. So the Russian Minister of Finance somehow had a chance to pay this money. And then you discover that some of these institutions, they have the grace period until May 25th. So again, there are loopholes, and makes these sanctions not as effective as they could be. Because again, we need financial sanctions, we need economic sanctions, we need technological sanctions, but they have to be as a package, and it should be a noose to strangle Putin and to deny him any resources to continue the war. Actually, I'm less concerned about the oil embargo on Russia. So it's good, but I don't want the free world to have such big sacrifices, because if you totally cut Russian oil from the market, the price goes up and he sells it elsewhere. He can probably offset it by selling it to China or India, because unfortunately there are buyers for his oil. So it's good, but technology is more important, because without technology, Gazprom and Rosneft will not function. They depend almost entirely on Western tech support. So that's why, again, you have to identify the key areas and just and do it with least damage to the Western consumers. So, and now speaking about the military assistance, nobody, and I have to emphasize it, talks about boots on the ground. It's not about NATO forces fighting for Putin for Ukraine in Ukraine, but NATO can do many other things. One, of course, I believe it's a must. It's a no-fly zone. I understand that it's a risk of engaging Russian pilots in air combat, but don't forget, this is Ukrainian sky. If we believe Ukraine is sovereign, why the hell we allow Russian planes to bomb civilians? Because since Putin failed to win the Blitzkrieg war, he has been steadily attacking civilians. This is every day, every hour, every minute we see Russian missiles, Russian bombs dropped on civilians. So Putin wants to bombard Ukrainians into submission. So I'm not sure that Putin will find many, if any, Russian pilots who will be willing to continue these sorties, these attacks, if NATO declares no-fly zone. Because it's bombing innocent civilians, and hospitals and maternity houses, theaters is one story. Facing NATO pilots in the air, that's another story. I don't think Russian army has many kamikaze these days. if ever had. Maybe at Stalin's time they had. So, but even like I can even accept the fact that NATO doesn't want it. So fine, I just but why not supply Ukraine with long-range missiles? Because one of the problems now that Ukraine received tons of the small arms, the good defensive arms against tanks and also Stingers that good against helicopters and planes flying at a low altitude. But they cannot shoot planes that are fly high. They don't have enough planes of their own. But also the most important thing that is not being talked enough, Russian warships. The most powerful missiles are actually fired from Russian warships. Actually, yesterday they even fired, believe it or not, some of the most powerful long-range missiles were fired from the Caspian Sea. So the Black Sea Fleet, and it's not only Black Sea Fleet, because Putin, preparing for the war, brought his half of his Pacific Fleet to the Black Sea. Can you imagine this? Putin has been preparing secretly for war. I mean, secretly preparing to bring Pacific Fleet to the Black Sea. Yes, okay, secret. So these ships could be an easy target if Ukraine had weapons. Now we hear from Americans, this is escalation, because that's already offensive weapon. What the hell is this? It's not offensive. It's this, if these ships, warships are shooting at Ukrainian cities, so that's the only way to stop them. It's to stop them is to think them. So we need the free world to come up with a simple strategy, defeating Putin in the war. My guess is now, again, we don't have enough time to go into all those details. I think that Americans are not willing Putin to lose decisively. They want some sort of a compromise because they are scared, as Bush 41 in 1991, scared that the collapse of Putin regime may lead to the collapse of Russia, and they don't know how to deal with that. That's, again, you may call my speculations, but unfortunately, I see too many facts that support this, some say conspiracy.
Well, there would be so many follow-ups on this answer, but I'll try to keep short here. So Bill Browder from Hermitage, you probably know him, claims that freezing oligarchs' money, by doing that, you are actually freezing Putin money, because the oligarchs are the custodian of Putin's own money, right? And that's the only thing he would care. We spoke a few weeks ago with Neil Ferguson, historian, and he believes that actually Putin's goal is not to become the next Stalin or any other Soviet leader, Lenin, but he wants to be the next Peter the Great. So the question for you is, what do you think it is Putin's ultimate goal?
I probably will argue with Neil Ferguson, because the facts tell me the otherwise. Actually, many years ago, I said that Putin's dream was to rule like Stalin and live like Abramovich. Putin wants to combine these two worlds. So to be a dictator, but to have a very luxurious life. And again, that's supported by all his decisions. He has the most luxurious palaces in the world, probably in the history of the world. There's so many of them. And it's that dozens of them in Russia. So we had recently, thanks to Alexei Navalny team, we had a glimpse of some of these palaces. They are just absolutely mind-boggling, with hundreds of millions of billions of dollars worth. But I don't think that Peter the Great analogy is the right one, because while Peter was a Tsar, he was the ruler, very cruel. So he was not shy of using violence. But Peter wanted to make Russia, economically it's developed, so a part of Europe. So he was bringing scientists into Russia. He was foreigners. He wanted to develop Russian industry to be competitive. Again, we may and probably should disagree with his methods, because it was not in natural development. So it was very much forced, industrialization. But that was industrialization. Now Putin doesn't care. So Putin relied only on Russian oil and gas and timber. So Russia created nothing. So when you look at the Russia today, it's going backward. So that's why I would say it's not it's not Peter the Great. It's more closer to Stalin and Ivan the Terrible, because I think in his mind, deep down in his mind, Putin believes that the world should live under different rules. And I think one of the fundamental differences that we cannot reconcile between us and him it's violence. We believe that violence is sometimes is necessary, but it's not desirable. We have to minimize the violence. The idea of our society is to move into the future, minimizing the factor of violence, both domestically and international. Putin looks in the opposite direction. He thinks that violence is not just, acceptable, but it's desirable. It's a tool to actually to spread his influence. And the war in Ukraine is somehow, it's a demonstration. He's now, I'm sure, enjoying the fact that he has been committing war crimes on an industrial scale. And the most powerful military alliance, NATO, is standing by doing nothing, just watching it from the front row. So for him, it's a great satisfaction. It shows that, it's the brutal political will can dominate even without decisive military backup.
Gary, is there a scenario for you in which Putin loses and stays around? And also, if you could connect your answer with the fact that you probably have many friends still in Russia on the ground. You have a better sense than media, which is always first a victim of wars. Do you think there is a chance that he suffers a coup or he's taken out of the power due to this financial weakness? I mean, this financial link. What is your view in regard to how things are moving inside Russia? Because I remember from your book, you had a very good sense for the feel for this tectonic changes. I mean, you recalled your conversation with Kissinger back then when you mentioned that you felt by the end of the year there is no Soviet Union, and in fact that's what happened. So the point is, what are you seeing on the ground and what are you sensing, or is this something that we are still a little sometime we have to wait some time?
You said friends in Russia, so I have few distant relatives there, but as my friends, they're either in jail or dead, or exile like myself. So people who shared my views, they had no room in Putin's Russia. So and the list of those who suffered from Putin's regime might be too long to mention. Yes, we're hearing some words from Russia, though it's very difficult now to receive proper information from the ground, because the regime is trying to close the information loop. So it's almost a bubble now. Though we still have few options, to receive, like from apps like Telegram or WhatsApp that's still functioning there, some pictures, but the normal communication with Russian public is impossible. So from what we know, and this number is being now very widely publicized, from some polling, 71% of Russians supported war in Ukraine. So, I would be very skeptical about it, because if somebody is responding to a call, because what is polling? Anonymous call. Oh, Giovanni, what are you thinking about the war in Ukraine? So if you know that being against the war could land you in jail for 3 years, because the moment you say war in Russia, so that's a ban. And if you talk about real losses of Russian troops in Ukraine, you can end up in jail for 15 years. So this is draconian laws. I'm surprised that 29% are honestly saying they're against it. But I would say that the 71% you can split by 2, so easily. So that's the people just that didn't want to say that. So looking at again all these facts, separated facts, I would say that support for war now in Russia is way below the one that was for annexation of Crimea 8 years ago. Then we had some spontaneous demonstrations. People felt a bit proud. Now it's all like patriotism on steroids. So its government has to pay to create an illusion of public support. But being against or not supportive, it's not the same as protesting and making it to the streets. So there were tens of thousands of Russians that made it to the streets, and at least 15,000 of them were arrested for protesting the war. That's not enough to overthrow Putin. So if we're looking for a scenario, and I believe there are two scenarios. So this is this. One is it's one that Ukraine will be somehow forced to negotiate, and what kind of concessions Zelensky can make, I don't know. It doesn't seem that he's willing to make any real concessions, but there will be some sort of a deal offering Putin off ramps. That's what Americans want. That's what Biden administration wants, to keep Putin as not a partner, but somebody at the negotiating table, because they want to talk about Green New Deal. They want to Iran, of course, an important thing. And that means that the war will resume eventually, because as long as Putin stays in Kremlin, there will be no peace. So that will be temporary relief that will end up with much worse conflict. Now, another scenario is Ukraine receives enough military supply to win the war. And I say win the war, I believe there's a very good chance. Right now, it's a stalemate. But if Ukraine receives long-range missiles, I think it's not a fantasy to see Ukrainian troops basically, taking over the whole country. It's a bigger army, very motivated. They keep getting more and more resources because people coming back, and Putin's army is depleted. So set aside of Putin using chemicals or tactical nuclear weapon, Ukrainians will win the war, even without NATO forces there. So again, was more weapons. Now, military defeat leads to social economic revolt, because losing in Ukraine and at the same time seeing the economic collapse typically creates a revolutionary situation. And people could go to the streets, and Putin may not have enough money to pay for the police to subdue these people. And also propaganda may start, just crumbling under the pressure of the facts. And again, not so many people would like to stick their neck to a dictator who is failing. And then, only then, we can expect what you called palace coup. Only then you can see people saying, okay, now the boss is too weak, is losing. And then what happens, again, we read it in history books, they will need a scapegoat. The only way for these people to leave this sinking ship is to find a scapegoat. And of course, Putin will be a scapegoat. So if Putin collapses within this scenario, I can bet you that people around him will be shouting at every corner that we have to follow this crazy guy. We'll know so much about Putin, so much dirt will be revealed. So, but still, I wish, we could have this day sooner rather than later. And though I hate these people, I still think that many of them, for anybody who pulled the trigger, should be fully compensated for his, not for his bravery, but for his, act of conscious act out of his cowardice.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned about some options like chemical weapons or nuke, and also you mentioned before that what Putin does is that he plays poker, so he raises the stakes as if he is bluffing, right? But I remember back in 2003, if I'm not wrong, when he started chasing Yukos and Hodorkovsky, he was asked if he was bluffing, and his answer was, well, I came from the KGB, and there I learned that if you pull the gun, you have to shoot. So the question is, does he have the courage to push the nuke button, and in which circumstances he will do that?
You mentioned 2003 Yukos.
Yes.
And yes, Putin was willing to shoot because he knew he was safe. It was not, shoot out. It was him shooting, and his opponents, they had their hands tied behind their back. Putin made these moves, and then he tested the water again. The key was the reaction of other oligarchs in Russia, and they decided to stick with Putin. It's again a long story. I'm more than happy to talk about it. We're just running out of time. But then he thought, okay, I can do that. And also the free world paid no attention to the fact that the biggest company in Russia was not nationalized, but basically taken away from Khodorkovsky and his partners and given to Putin's buddies. So it just taken away the company that was worth billions and billions of dollars, stealing it. And the free world, big yawn. Big deal, fine, you can do that. Putin was still having his seat on G7 plus one, I never call it G8. So he was still, as a legitimate partner for world leaders. So he believed that, that's a way to act. Why not? As I said, it's not why. Why not? I could take it. I made myself rich. I helped my friends. So he was quite pleased. Now, speaking about nukes now, it's the same story. He is willing to use it as a blackmail. Is he willing to shoot? That's the question. I don't have an answer. I'm not going to lie to you saying never. Yeah, you can do that, maybe. The question is that, as far as I'm aware, it's not the decision of a one man. So typically you have it's a chain. And are you sure that other people are willing to die, even if Putin is? And also it's about sending the right signal. Let's say Putin tells the admiral in the Black Sea to shoot a tactical nuclear missile to one of the Ukrainian strongholds. I think everything depends on the understanding of this admiral whether the use of nuclear weapon will have an immediate retaliation from NATO. If he knows that the moment he pushed the button, so it's that he will have 5 minutes to leave because NATO missile will come back, I don't think he will push the button. So that's why the whole idea about this nuclear brinkmanship, about this nuclear poker, blackmail, it's about again, as in poker, who blinks first. And if Putin succeeds now with the nuclear blackmail, he'll lose it again. So that's why I'm puzzled, because I cannot reconcile statements from American administration coming from President Biden and others. Oh, we cannot afford to have military confrontation with Russia that could end up in nuclear war, in Ukraine. But we will defend every inch of NATO territory. Again, can I understand how you reconcile these two things? Because who's going to attack Lithuania and Poland? The same Russia. If this is it's like main condition, premeditated condition. So that's no war with Russia. How are you going to defend other NATO countries? Piece of paper? Who cares about piece of paper? That's Article 5 is just, the paper. There's no political will behind it, so Putin will continue. By the way, today already we saw a first test. The Russian military jet crossed borders of Poland and Lithuania, made a little circle and came back. Again, it's no real menace. But next time, it could, by mistake, drop a bomb. Yeah, maybe a small bomb, small explosive. But this is okay. He keeps testing now. He'll see what happens. By the way, maybe I missed it. I have not seen any response from NATO yet. So what NATO has to do, immediately say, any appearance of Russian planes in NATO airspace now, we'll shoot it down. We'll shoot it down. Because it's now NATO airspace. Again, that's how you lose this poker game. That's how you lose the psychological battle. And that means that NATO refusal to engage Putin in Ukraine, I believe not decrease, but increase the risk. Because he will become emboldened and he will continue doing things that will put NATO in the corner, and then there will be no way out but to fight.
Garry, we are very conscious of your time, and would you mind having a last couple of questions, maybe one from me and one from Eduardo? Okay, I'll shoot you one here, right?
So I think they deserve, to be engaged.
Okay, so well, let's assume for a moment that we are in an optimistic scenario where this doesn't escalate much further and we don't have an open third world war, right? How do you see the free world maintaining a commercial agenda, trade agenda with countries? And we can go further. Let's say we go in the future and this problem is sort of solved. Still, we have a divided world in a way. Can we reconcile everything and a trade agenda, trade commerce, and a fight for an agenda for human rights as well and democracy?
That's a very big question, because it brings us back to the system of international relations. And that's what I said about 1991. The collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, made it necessary to create new international organizations. United Nations is useless these days. By the way, we don't hear much of anything from UN on Ukraine, because this organization proved to be totally incapable of doing anything. It's more like a showcase for dictators. the many signatories of UN Declaration of Human Rights, they are the worst violators. So I think it's important, for us to look in the future as the structure, that will have an international structure that will be based on the values of the free world. And when we say West, it's not only West, because you have countries stretching from Japan to Brazil and from Canada to New Zealand. So it's, but we understand the term West means democracies and market economies, and South Korea and Taiwan as important part of this equation as Germany or Great Britain. And I think that's time for us to start looking for these new arrangements. It doesn't mean that we have to stop trading with unfree part of the world. By the way, it's, even if we consider India as a democracy now, let's for the moment, I just don't argue with those who say it's not clear. So, but it's definitely not not authoritarian country. So it's somewhere just in the gray area. So we're still talking about 60+% of people in the world living in unfree countries, 60+%. So, and China, of course, on top of that. But again, the list is pretty big and long. So we have to find the right algorithm, but what we cannot afford is to have any dependence on these countries, on key areas. Like, Europe had dependence on Russian oil. Yes, they do things, it's business, but we cannot play the game by, play the international business game by bending rules for them. Because, the idea that, we can trade with them and it will liberalize the countries. Actually, it worked the other way. So it's not just we failed to liberalize Russia or China, but we actually adopted many corrupted practices from them. So those are the lessons for us to learn. And I think, again, the best hope for us is that Ukrainian war will end Putin's regime, and then Russia will become a part of the global solution, not a permanent source of trouble.
Great. Well, Garry, we are getting to the finish line. So I would like you to comment on this blue and white flag, and please say something good about the future.
No, actually, it's hopefully it's an element of the future. It's probably quite ironic that is in 1990, in September 1990, I was the first Soviet athlete who refused to play on the Soviet flag, and I demanded that in my match against Karpov in New York, I would have Russian flag. So it's white, blue, and red. So Russian tricolor. So that was the first statement, and I was the first athlete who ever played on the Russian flag, 15 months before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's also ironic now that this is what thanks for asking. So I'm sitting with the future Russian flag behind me, because spontaneously so many people around the world now, Russians, who are opposing Putin's war and Putin's regime, they came up with the idea that future Russia must not have any blood on the flag. So no more red color. So this is it's a current Russian flag with the bottom red stripe replaced by the white one. Of course, on the other side is Ukrainian flag, and it's written in 2 languages, "Glory to Ukraine." So maybe it's a future. And I'm I'm an incorrigible optimist. So I believe that with so many great things happening now in the world. Now that's when you look at the technology, at our this participation of people in the whole process. Ukrainian war somehow was a catalyst of that, and the pandemics they put very heavy price on us. So this is, we all suffered. So for me it was a most tragic loss. I lost my mother to COVID in December 2020. But what I think is this was a moment for us to understand that there's no substitution for the free world, because at the end of the day, whatever people say about China and China's threat to our world of life, China gave us virus, and America and the free world came up with the vaccine. So I think we should be optimistic that we live in a part of the world where things can happen, and I think that's more and more we're learning that the values, they are not just empty words. Values is something that could become material, because only the free world that is sticking to its founding values could offer us a safe and safe path into a bright future.
Well, I don't think we could end this conversation on a better note. Thank you very much for your time, Garry. Thank you, Giovanni, for this conversation. I am pretty much sure that all clients enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hopefully I could have a better news next time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ok, cortamos.